So I'm going to do two versions of the build of this Zinc countertop. I'm going to do a high-speed edited version that will highlight the steps involved without any narration or talking, so it will be more visually engaging. So if that's what you're looking for, you can skip ahead to the next video, which will go a lot quicker. This is the tutorial video where I will be explaining the materials and the steps involved. And so if you're looking to build this kind of thing yourself, you can get the information that you need about all the tools and stuff. I'm making a zinc top, roughly 3 by 4 feet and 2 inches thick. And I've got all my tools and materials laid out here before I begin. And I have some new methods that I use making these zinc and copper tops, so I've been getting better results, and I thought it would be a good time to do an updated tutorial for those who want to venture making these themselves. Over here I have the zinc. This is the soft zinc from rotometals.com, and it's fairly pliable and workable with a hammer. The cold rolled zinc and copper is more work hardened and stiff and would require a bending brake to work with it properly, and that's something I don't have. So people always ask me about the thickness of the metal that I use, and I can never remember because it's the hardness that matters the most. The soft copper and zinc is hot rolled and much more malleable. For the substrate, I use a material called Advantech. It's a roofing and flooring underlayment that's very stable and water resistant. And that makes it a good substrate for kitchen countertops and bathrooms. And this material I bought last year, and I brought it into the shop, and I have it stickered so it dries evenly on both sides. And these sheets on the bottom are part of my gluing station, and the blocking is used to facilitate the clamping. I found that the Advantech does release some moisture and needs time to relax inside the shop in a heated space. So I buy it ahead of time and let it sit here for a few months to maybe 6 months or a year. And that helps it to reach its most stable state. The Advantech looks like OSB, but it has a wax additive that displaces some of the moisture and makes it more dimensionally stable. It's much more stable than plywood. But because of the wax, there can be issues with gluing. Certain kinds of glues won't stick to it very well. So for many years I used this polyurethane construction adhesive, which sticks very well to the Advantech, but isn't really flexible enough for the application. So I've been using this more flexible adhesive that is also sold by Rotometals for their zinc countertops. And it doesn't stick to the Advantech nearly as well. Good enough, but it's incredibly flexible. So what I do now is I have this homemade scratch block, some screws and a piece of 2x4, and I scour the surface of the Advantech before I do the glue pressing, and I tear up the fibers. That gives more mechanical grab. And likewise with the zinc, I scuff up the metal underneath with coarse grit sandpaper on the Orbit sander or the palm sander, and that's to break down that layer of oxidation. This is the mallet that I use to do the edge forming. It's a dead blow mallet that's fairly rounded, doesn't leave sharp indentations. This is a 12-ounce ball peen hammer for pounding the corners, and this is a fine-tooth hacksaw blade that I use for flush cutting the zinc. I have a slightly different corner pattern that I use, so I'll illustrate that process later. For fastening the metal underneath, I'm still using the 1/2" or 5/8 narrow crown staples. I adjust the PSI on the compressor fairly carefully so that it doesn't overshoot into the metal, but it goes through one layer of zinc or copper just fine, well, maybe 95% of the time. But Where the metal overlaps, there's 2 layers, and I'll use these aluminum tacks and just tack them in by hand. So on the edge work, usually I'll add these aluminum nails, 1.5" aluminum nails for just a little bit of detail. For this project, I will be installing these decorative tacks by customer request. These are 3/4 inch diameter. That'll be the last step in the process after I apply the juice, which is over here. This product has not changed. This is the same juice you can buy from me on my eBay store to make 1 gallon of this mixture. To prepare the surface of the zinc for the patina, I used these gray synthetic abrasive pads. It's not good to use steel wool, which contains grease, and that can affect the patina. But these can go right on the Velcro of the orbit sanders, and that makes quick work of flat surfaces. For cutting the metal, I use these nibblers to size the sheet to the rough dimension. This makes fast cuts, but not very accurate. For accurate cuts on the corners, I use these straight shears. These are by Milwaukee. They work pretty good. For deburring underneath where the metal is cut, I use this carbide scraper at a 45-degree angle, and that makes it not so sharp. This is a marking tool. It's just a screwdriver I sharpen to a chisel tip and a nail punch. I think that's pretty much it. I forgot to include some essential tools in my introduction, so this is introduction part 2. This is another screwdriver that I use a lot. It's got another ground tip that's more flat and wide at the edge, and also this round punch. I use both these tools for fixing problem areas where you've got overlapping metal on the corners. So I use the flat edge of the screwdriver to crimp the edges that stick up to help get them to sit flatter on the surface. And this is a specialty punch for setting staples that are sticking up way too far. And that happens as I'm adjusting the pressure to get the nail gun to shoot just right through the metal. For staples that misfire, I use these tools, little snips and little pliers for extracting staples that misfire, and that happens a few times. And for filing the more rough edges, I have this small half-round file that I use in conjunction with the carbide scraper. The straight snips have serrated edges, so they leave a rough edge on some of the cuts, and so the file gets used for that. I've got another ball peen, a smaller 8-ounce, which is a useful size, and a 1/16 diameter drill bit is used for pre-drilling partway for setting those decorative tacks. Could also use the nail punch, but the pre-drill is a little bit more effective. And the glue, finally I've got this clear glue, which I applied to the corner joints where the metal overlaps here. And so this area has the white polyurethane glue to help strengthen that corner and keep that edge flat. I don't know if that's overkill. It's just something I do on the thicker tops. It does make a little bit of a mess as I'm working with it, but I don't do it on the thinner tops. The 5-in-1 tool, can't leave this one out. It's pretty useful for cleaning glue, and can also work as a scoring tool for marking those corner cuts. This one's kind of dull, so I like to use this screwdriver, this little screwdriver, for that because I can see it better. So that's pretty much it. Let's get got this top in the press, which will remain for about a week. I put these corner blocks in to lock in the position. I've got one on each diagonal, and the purpose of that is to keep it from shifting. If any of these large clamps are slightly askew, the substrate will want to shift around, and that can be frustrating. So that solves that problem. Here I am applying a coat of paint to the bottom just to make it look less unfinished. I did 2 layers of Advantech for this top because it's going to be supported by a metal base, and so it needed to be extra strong with extra material for fastening the screws. Note that when I'm cutting the metal using the straight shears, I will stop about 1/16 of an inch before I complete the cut. And that's because it's almost impossible to prevent the shears from releasing and overcutting into the adjacent seam, and that will create a sharp edge. So I stop about 1/16 of an inch short and then bend and break the rest of it to complete the cut. Okay, so I've got my corners cut out and I'm now ready to form these edges. I put the tabs on the short sides and I do those 2 edges first. I cut this piece of scrap wood to the exact thickness of the substrate, and I use that to make this grid pattern with the score lines. And then I highlight the intersection points with a fine tip Sharpie just so I can see it better and aim the shears where they need to go to complete the cut. And so the first thing to do here is to clamp the substrate to this work surface table so that this edge is pretty much in line with this edge. And I'll start off with a mallet almost in a vertical position, just doing light taps along the edge to crease the metal. And then I gradually will increase the angle and the hammering force until I fold the metal over and then pound it flush to the edge. And then I'll repeat the process for this corner. I made this clamping block. I glued and clamped 3 strips of scrap plywood together. I just have a lot of scrap plywood and not that much solid material, but that makes clamping the edge easier. And I use these heavy-duty bar clamps that work well for that. Over here, I made these templates for laying out the spacing of the 3/4 inch decorative tacks. It's really important to get this step right and avoid a measuring error. I like to make a template, and these are pre-drilled with a small 1/16 diameter drill bit because the tacks require some pre-drilling. So I do the layout and the pre-drilling in one step with these templates, also out of scrap plywood. And by the way, if you've been watching my previous zinc videos, I would have this little extra tab here, pointy little triangle tab that I would fold over on the bottom. And I don't do that anymore. Now I flush cut this surface after I get this tab folded over, and I just flush trim it with this fine-tooth hacksaw blade. Clamping at this step is crucial to form a crisp 90-degree bend. Otherwise, if it's not clamped sufficiently, the glue will fail and the metal will separate underneath that substrate and roll over the edge instead of forming a 90-degree bend.